I thought getting pulled over would be the worst moment of my week, but I never imagined the handsome rookie cop writing me a ticket would one day become the man I'd risk my heart for. Rain hammered against my windshield as I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. The dashboard clock glowed 6:42 p.m., and every passing minute made my stomach twist tighter. My client had trusted me with one of the most important moments of their lives, their engagement photos, and I was already 20 minutes late delivering the finished album. "Come on," I muttered as another traffic light turned yellow. Seattle weather had transformed the streets into shimmering mirrors. The rain blurred storefront lights into colorful streaks while windshield wipers struggled to keep up. My camera bags occupied the passenger seat, packed with lenses worth more than my aging sedan. Being a freelance photographer wasn't glamorous. It meant chasing deadlines, skipping meals, and hoping every client paid on time. Still, I loved freezing moments people wanted to remember forever. Tonight, however, all I wanted was to reach my client before they gave up on me. I pressed the accelerator a little harder. 5 seconds later, blue and red lights exploded in my rearview mirror. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." I slowly pulled onto the shoulder, letting out a long sigh before resting my forehead against the steering wheel. This day just keeps getting better. After taking a deep breath, I rolled down the window as the police officer approached. Tall, broad shoulders, dark navy uniform perfectly pressed despite the rain. He couldn't have been older than 30. Rain rolled off the brim of his cap as he stopped beside my window. "Good evening," he said calmly. "License and registration, please." His voice surprised me. It wasn't aggressive. It was steady, controlled, professional. I forced an awkward smile. "So, is there any chance those lights were for someone else?" His expression barely changed. "I'm afraid not." I handed over my license. "Ethan Carter." He glanced at it before looking back at me. "You were driving 43 in a 25-mile zone." I rubbed the back of my neck. "In my defense." He waited. "I don't actually have a defense." For just the briefest second, I thought I saw the corner of his mouth threaten to move. Not quite a smile. Just almost. "I'm late delivering photographs," I continued. Not exactly a Hollywood-worthy excuse. "No," he replied evenly. "It isn't." He returned to his patrol car, leaving me alone with my embarrassment. Great. Late. Getting a ticket. Probably soaked because I'd left my umbrella at home. Perfect. A few minutes later, he returned with the citation. "Officer Mason Brooks," his name tag read. He explained the ticket carefully, pointing out the payment instructions and court information without sounding annoyed or impatient. I signed where he indicated. "I guess this means my driving record officially hates me." Again, almost a smile. Almost. As I reached for the paperwork, one of my camera bags shifted sharply across the passenger seat. A long lens nearly hit the dashboard. Without thinking, Mason reached through the open window just enough to steady the bag before it could fall. His movements were quick but careful. "You should secure your equipment," he said. "Those lenses aren't cheap." I blinked. Most officers would have simply handed me the ticket and walked away. Instead, he'd noticed something that mattered to me. "I usually do," I admitted. "I was rushing." He gave a small nod. "Drive safely, Mr. Carter."
No lecture. No unnecessary attitude.
Just quiet concern hidden beneath strict professionalism. As he walked back toward his patrol car, I caught myself watching him longer than necessary. Then I shook my head. What am I doing? I started the engine. It's just a traffic ticket. By the time I finally delivered the album, my clients were understanding enough to forgive the delay. The speeding ticket, however, stayed in my jacket pocket for days. Every time I reached for my wallet, I saw Officer Mason Brooks' name printed neatly across the top. I told myself I was annoyed. Nothing more. 3 days later, I wandered downtown searching for interesting street photography after another client canceled. Street musicians played beneath covered sidewalks while shoppers hurried between cafes. I lifted my camera toward an elderly couple laughing beneath one umbrella. Click. A child chasing pigeons. Click. A man reading outside a bookstore. Click. Then everything changed. Someone burst through the doors of a nearby convenience store. He was running. Fast. People screamed behind him. The cashier shouted, "Stop him!" The man shoved another customer aside before sprinting across the street. Instinct took over. Instead of freezing, I raised my camera. Click, click, click. Years of photography had trained my hands to react before my brain did. I captured the suspect from multiple angles as he disappeared between buildings. Sirens echoed only moments later. Police vehicles surrounded the area. Officers questioned witnesses while paramedics checked on the shaken cashier. One detective noticed the camera hanging around my neck. "Did you photograph him?" I think I did." Within minutes, they were reviewing the images on my camera's display. The detective's eyes widened. "These are incredibly clear. I was already shooting the street." He nodded. "These could identify our suspect." Suddenly, my ordinary afternoon became anything but ordinary. I spent over an hour giving a witness statement before finally heading home, emotionally exhausted. The following morning, my phone rang. "Mr. Carter?" "Speaking. This is the Seattle Police Department." My stomach tightened. "We'd like you to come in this afternoon. We need your assistance with the robbery investigation." I agreed. When I arrived at the station later that day, an officer escorted me through a hallway lined with busy detectives and ringing phones. He opened the interview room door. "Your investigator will be with you shortly." I stepped inside. The door opened again less than a minute later. My heart skipped. Officer Mason Brooks walked into the room carrying a file. He looked just as surprised to see me. "Mr. Carter." I couldn't help laughing softly. "You've got to be kidding. I didn't know you were our witness. And I definitely didn't expect the guy who gave me a speeding ticket." For the first time, a genuine smile crossed his face. Small, warm, completely different from the guarded officer I'd met on the roadside. "It seems," he said as he took a seat across from me, "our second meeting is under better circumstances." Somehow, it already felt different. Neither of us knew it yet. But that quiet interview room was where two strangers would unknowingly begin writing the first chapter of a story neither had ever expected. Working with Officer Mason Brooks was nothing like I expected. The interview that afternoon lasted nearly 2 hours, but it felt strangely effortless. We reviewed every photograph I'd taken outside the convenience store, zooming in on storefront reflections, parked cars, and tiny details that I would have normally ignored. "You notice things most people don't," Mason said while studying one image. I shrugged. "That's literally how I pay rent." A quiet chuckle escaped him. It was soft enough that I almost thought I'd imagined it. Before I left, he thanked me again. "These photos could make a real difference. I was just in the right place." "No," he replied. "You chose to help." Something about the way he said it lingered with me during the drive home. Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation continued. Because several security cameras in the area had been damaged, my photographs became one of the strongest pieces of evidence. The detectives occasionally needed me to identify where certain pictures had been taken or estimate the exact time each photo was captured. That meant returning to the station, again and again. Each visit gave me another excuse to see Mason. Our conversations slowly changed. The first few meetings were strictly professional. Then they became casual. Eventually, they started with work and somehow ended with completely unrelated topics. One afternoon, he noticed a landscape photograph displayed on my tablet. "You took this. Mount Rainier last fall. It's beautiful." I smiled. "Thanks. You should exhibit your work someday." The compliment caught me off guard. Most people only saw me as the guy who photographed weddings or birthdays. Mason looked at my work like it actually mattered. "You really think so?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." His honesty was refreshing. There were no exaggerated compliments. No flirting. Just quiet sincerity. A few days later, I arrived earlier than scheduled. The detective handling the robbery case hadn't arrived yet, so I found myself waiting in the break room with a cup of stale coffee. To my surprise, Mason walked in carrying another mug. "You voluntarily drink that?" he asked, glancing at my coffee. "It builds character." It builds stomach problems. I laughed. So, do cops always judge civilian coffee choices? Only the dangerous ones. For a second, we simply stood there smiling at each other. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was peaceful. Over coffee, I learned something unexpected. Mason hadn't grown up in Seattle. He had transferred from another city only a few months earlier. Fresh start, I asked carefully. He stared into his mug before answering. My former partner was killed during a hostage situation. The room suddenly felt much quieter.
I'm sorry.
He nodded once. He was my best friend. There was no dramatic speech.
No tears.
Just a sentence carrying years of grief. I thought moving here would make it easier. Did it? I don't know. For the first time since we'd met, the confident police officer looked tired. Not physically, emotionally, like someone who had spent years carrying invisible weight. I wanted to say something comforting. Instead, I simply replied, "I'm glad you came." His eyes met mine. So am I. The detective entered moments later, ending the conversation before either of us could think too much about it. Over the following days, our meetings became something I secretly looked forward to. Sometimes we'd review photographs. Sometimes we'd discuss witness timelines. Sometimes we'd only exchange a few words in the hallway. Yet every encounter somehow brightened my day. One afternoon, I was helping organize digital evidence when the computer suddenly froze. I sighed dramatically. There it is. What? The famous police technology everyone warns me about. Mason raised an eyebrow. You think our equipment is that bad? I've seen museums with newer computers. He tried to remain serious. He failed. A genuine laugh escaped him. Not a polite smile. A real laugh. Several officers turned toward us. One detective blinked in surprise. Brooks. Another officer grinned. I didn't know you knew how to laugh. Mason looked almost embarrassed. I forgot you were all here. The room filled with light-hearted teasing. For reasons I couldn't explain, seeing him laugh felt like witnessing sunshine after weeks of rain. It suited him, far more than the serious expression he usually wore. Not every meeting happened inside the station. One Saturday morning, I stopped by a neighborhood bookstore looking for photography collections. As I reached for a book, another hand reached for the same copy. I looked up. Mason. He smiled. Ethan, what are you doing here? I read. I pretended to gasp. Police officers can read? He folded his arms. Careful. I already got one ticket. You could earn another. We spent nearly an hour wandering through the bookstore discussing travel, photography, mystery novels, and childhood dreams. Not once did we mention the robbery investigation. It felt less like two people who had met through work, and more like two friends discovering how naturally they fit together. A week later, we unexpectedly crossed paths again at a weekend farmer's market. You stalking me? I asked with a grin. I was about to ask you the same thing.
I'm innocent.
So am I. Neither of us believed the other. We ended up sharing lunch from neighboring food stalls while sitting on a wooden bench overlooking the waterfront. Conversation flowed effortlessly. There were moments when neither of us spoke. Neither of us needed to. The silence itself had become comfortable. As evening approached, dark clouds rolled across the sky. Within minutes, heavy rain began pouring down. People rushed toward nearby shops for shelter. I checked my phone. The buses are delayed. You drove. I walked. Mason looked toward the parking lot. I'll take you home. You don't have to. I know. There was something gentle in the way he said it. The drive through rain-soaked streets felt strangely peaceful. Soft music played quietly through the speakers. Streetlights reflected across the windshield. Neither of us seemed eager to break the comfortable silence. When we finally reached my apartment building, I hesitated before opening the door. Thanks. He kept both hands resting on the steering wheel. Then, almost as if he hadn't planned to say it aloud, he quietly admitted, I haven't enjoyed someone's company like this in years. I looked at him, really looked at him. The confident officer who had once seemed impossible to read now looked almost nervous. "I've enjoyed it too," I answered softly. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The rain continued falling outside. Eventually, I stepped out of the car. As I closed the door, I caught him watching to make sure I reached my apartment entrance safely. The next morning, my phone exploded with notifications. Friends.
Client.
Messages I didn't understand. Someone had posted photographs online showing me sitting inside a police patrol car the night before. The captions were already spreading. Police officer gives special treatment to mystery boyfriend. Witness receiving favors? Is this why the robbery case is moving so slowly? I stared at my screen in disbelief. What had felt like a simple ride home had suddenly become something far more dangerous. And for the first time since meeting Mason Brooks, I realized that getting close to him might come with consequences neither of us had ever imagined. By Monday morning, the rumors had spread far beyond social media. Someone had anonymously emailed screenshots of the photographs to the Seattle Police Department, accusing Officer Mason Brooks of showing favoritism toward a key witness. The investigation into the robbery hadn't even reached trial, yet suddenly Mason himself had become the subject of an internal review. I read the headlines with a sinking feeling. Police officer under investigation after viral photos. Did a witness receive special treatment? The comments were even worse. People who had never met us confidently decided they knew our story. I wanted to call Mason immediately. Instead, my phone rang first. Ethan? It was his voice. Calm. Controlled. Almost too controlled. "They've opened an internal investigation. I'm so sorry. You don't have anything to apologize for. But they've instructed me to avoid unnecessary contact with you until the review is complete." The words landed harder than I expected. "So, we can't see each other?" There was a long silence. "For now."
No.
His answer sounded painful. "It's better this way." Before I could respond, the call ended. I stared at the silent phone in my hand. For the first time since we'd met, there was nothing left to say. Days passed, then weeks. Without our regular conversations, my apartment suddenly felt much quieter. Every coffee shop reminded me of him. Every rainy evening reminded me of the ride home. I kept telling myself we had only been friends. So why did losing those small moments hurt this much? Meanwhile, Mason buried himself in work. He volunteered for extra patrols, accepted overnight shifts, anything to keep his mind occupied. His fellow officers noticed the change immediately. "You've barely spoken all week," one partner observed. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." I said I'm fine, but he wasn't. Late one evening, after finishing a long shift, Mason found himself parked outside my apartment building without even realizing he'd driven there. He sat quietly inside his patrol car. The lights in my apartment window were still on. For several minutes, he simply looked toward the building. Then he drove away. Neither of us knew someone else had been watching everything. Detective Ryan Cole had worked in the department for over 12 years. When Mason transferred to Seattle, his professionalism and quick promotions made him popular with senior leadership. Ryan hated that. He believed the younger officer had earned respect too quickly. The internal investigation gave him the perfect opportunity. "If Brooks wants to play the hero," Ryan muttered one evening inside the evidence room, "let's see how heroic he looks after this." Over the following days, Ryan quietly manipulated the investigation. He leaked confidential witness information online. Then he anonymously reported the leak. Finally, he altered several evidence logs to make it appear as though I had somehow gained access to restricted police information. Everything pointed toward one conclusion. The witness, me. One Thursday afternoon, there was a knock on my apartment door. Two detectives stood outside. "Mr. Carter?" "Yes. We need you to come with us." My stomach dropped. "Am I under arrest?"
No.
"Then what's happening?" "We have a few questions." The ride to the station felt far longer than it actually was. This building had once become a place where I looked forward to visiting. Now every hallway felt cold. Every face looked suspicious. Inside the interview room, detectives questioned me for nearly 2 hours. Who gave you confidential information? No one. Did Officer Brooks share details of the investigation? Never. Have you ever accessed police files?
No.
Have you spoken with reporters?
No.
Every answer seemed to create even more questions. Behind the large observation window, hidden from my view, Mason watched everything unfold. His hands remained tightly clenched at his sides. Captain Harris stood beside him. You understand why you can't interfere. I know. If you enter that room, the investigation becomes compromised. I know. You need to let internal affairs handle this. Mason nodded, but every minute that passed became harder to endure. He knew me. He knew I would never leak evidence. Something didn't fit. Something was wrong. Instead of going home after his shift, Mason requested access to archived surveillance footage from the evidence storage area. Officially, he was reviewing department security. Unofficially, he was searching for the truth. Hour after hour, he watched recordings. Most showed nothing unusual. Until nearly midnight, one camera captured Detective Ryan Cole entering the evidence room alone. Another showed him removing a file. Minutes later, he returned carrying different paperwork. Mason paused the recording, then zoomed in. Ryan had altered the evidence log. His heart began racing. There you are. He kept searching. Another hallway camera showed Ryan photographing confidential witness documents with his personal phone. Everything suddenly made sense. The anonymous leak, the altered records, the accusations against me. None of it had been an accident. The following morning, Mason walked straight into Captain Harris's office carrying copies of the footage. You need to see this. Within an hour, Internal Affairs reviewed the recordings. Ryan was immediately confronted. At first, he denied everything. Then investigators compared timestamps, security footage, and digital records. The evidence was overwhelming. By noon, Detective Ryan Cole was escorted out of the station. His badge removed. His investigation over. Several hours later, the detective questioning me entered the room with a noticeably different expression. Mr. Carter, he placed a folder on the table. You've been completely cleared. I blinked. What? The allegations against you were fabricated. So, I'm free. You were never under arrest. Relief washed over me so quickly that my knees nearly gave out. As I stepped outside the station, cool evening air filled my lungs. Someone called my name. Ethan. I turned. Mason stood near the entrance. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I slowly walked toward him. I began quietly. I thought you stopped believing me. Pain crossed his face. I never stopped believing you. Then why did you disappear? He lowered his eyes. Because I thought staying away would protect you. It didn't. I know. He looked at me with an honesty I'd never seen before. I never stopped believing in you. His voice became softer. I stopped believing I deserved to be close to you. Every wall he'd carefully built around himself seemed to crumble in that single sentence. Without thinking, I stepped closer. So what happens now? Before he could answer, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. The color drained from his face. What is it? I asked. He slowly lowered the phone. I've been transferred. What? My reassignment was approved this morning. He swallowed hard. I have 48 hours before I leave Seattle. Everything we had fought to protect, every feeling we'd finally admitted, suddenly came with an expiration date. 48 hours. That was all the time Mason Brooks had left in Seattle. The words echoed in my mind long after we left the police station. I wanted to believe there had to be another option, another conversation, another chance to change the ending that seemed to be waiting for us. Instead, Mason quietly smiled. I'll be okay. It was the same smile he'd worn ever since I'd met him. Gentle, controlled, and carefully hiding everything he really felt. You don't mean that, I said. He looked away toward the parking lot. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel good. Running away isn't the right thing. I'm not running. Aren't you? For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he stepped closer. I've already brought enough trouble into your life. You didn't. You were questioned because of me. I was questioned because one detective lied. You became the center of online rumors. I survived. You deserve someone whose life isn't this complicated. I laughed softly, shaking my head. You really don't get it. His eyebrows lifted slightly. I didn't fall for the uniform. His breathing seemed to stop. I fell for the man who noticed my camera before he noticed my mistake. The corners of his eyes softened. The man who encouraged my photography. The man who laughs at terrible coffee. The man who kept making sure I got home safely. His voice was barely above a whisper. Ethan, I don't care about the badge. I care about you. For several seconds he simply stood there, unable to answer. Then he gently reached for my hand. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. Just a quiet touch that somehow said everything words couldn't. I wish we'd met under different circumstances, he admitted. So do I. But maybe, I smiled, we wouldn't have become us. He squeezed my hand once before letting go. I should finish packing. I watched him walk away. Every instinct told me to stop him. Instead, I let him leave. That night I couldn't sleep. Every memory replayed in my mind. The traffic stop, the bookstore, coffee that tasted awful, rain against the patrol car windows, his first real laugh. I suddenly realized something. Every important memory we shared had happened because one of us had been brave enough to take another step. If I stayed home now, I'd regret it forever. The next morning I drove across Seattle searching for him. His apartment was empty. The station told me he'd finished his final paperwork. I visited the bookstore where we'd accidentally met. Nothing. The coffee shop where we joked about terrible coffee. Nothing. The farmer's market. Nothing. Each place reminded me how much had changed in only a few weeks. Finally, I remembered something Mason had once mentioned. Whenever work became overwhelming, he escaped to the waterfront. The ocean doesn't ask questions, he'd said. It just listens. I drove there immediately. The evening sun painted the sky with shades of orange and gold. People walked along the pier while boats gently rocked against the docks. Then I saw him, standing alone near the railing, watching the sunset. He heard my footsteps before I reached him. Without turning around, he smiled. I wondered how long it would take. You knew I'd come? I hoped. I stood beside him. For a while neither of us spoke. The waves filled the silence. Finally, Mason reached into his jacket pocket. I was going to leave this in your mailbox. He handed me a folded envelope. Inside was my speeding ticket. Across the front he'd written one sentence. Best mistake I ever made. I looked up. He was smiling. Really smiling. Not hiding anymore. I laughed through unexpectedly watery eyes. You kept my ticket? I probably wasn't supposed to. I should report you. You probably should. We both laughed. The tension we'd carried for weeks slowly disappeared with the evening breeze. Then Mason became serious again. You once asked what happens now. I did. I finally have an answer. He took a slow breath. Every excuse I found to see you, he smiled shyly, became the best part of my week. I felt my heart racing. I kept telling myself it was just friendship. He continued. Then I kept missing you every day we couldn't speak. He stepped closer. And eventually I realized. His voice nearly disappeared. I was already falling in love with you. My eyes never left his. So was I. For the first time since we'd met, neither fear nor duty stood between us. Mason gently cupped my face, giving me every chance to step back. I didn't. Instead, I closed the small distance between us. Our kiss was soft, unhurried, filled with relief more than certainty. It wasn't the beginning of a perfect life. It was simply the beginning of ours. When we finally pulled apart, we were both smiling. So, I teased, are you still leaving tomorrow? He laughed. I was. You changed your mind? I submitted an appeal this afternoon. You what? The captain offered me a permanent assignment in Seattle after everything that happened. And I accepted. I couldn't stop smiling. Months later, life looked very different. The robbery case ended successfully. Detective Ryan Cole was dismissed from the department. Mason earned the respect of everyone in the precinct for exposing the truth even when it risked his own career. As for me, I finally listened to Mason's advice. I organized my first photography exhibition. Friends, clients, officers from the precinct, and neighbors all filled the small downtown gallery. The title of the exhibition hung proudly above the entrance. The day everything changed. Every photograph represented a moment that had shaped my journey. Rainy streets, city lights, coffee shops, bookstores, sunsets over the waterfront. Visitors slowly made their way to the final photograph displayed alone on the largest wall. It wasn't a famous landmark. It wasn't an award-winning landscape. It was simply Mason, standing by the waterfront, smiling naturally.
No uniform, no walls.
Just the man I'd fallen in love with. He walked over and slipped his hand into mine. I still can't believe you made me the final photograph. I smiled. You're my favorite view. He laughed, shaking his head. You know, I've been meaning to ask you something. What? Now that we're officially together. He leaned in with a playful grin. Can you promise me one thing? Depends. No more speeding. I pretended to think about it.
No promises.
He laughed. I had a feeling you'd say that. As we walked out of the gallery hand in hand, I looked at him and smiled. You know. What? Getting that ticket turned out to be the luckiest day of my life. He squeezed my hand. And meeting the man behind the steering wheel was the best decision I never planned to make. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with perfect timing. Sometimes it arrives with flashing lights, unexpected detours, and impossible choices. And sometimes, the person who stops your journey becomes the one you choose to walk beside for the rest of it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more emotional gay love stories with happy endings every week. Tell me in the comments. Do you think Ethan should have fought for Mason sooner? Or did love find them at exactly the right time? I read every comment, and your ideas often inspire future stories. Until the next story, take care of yourself, believe in love, and remember that sometimes the most unexpected moments can change your life forever.